All right, so one of the beliefs that I had when I was like 11 years old, and I remember this really vividly. I played baseball. I was mildly athletic when I was a kid, and I played baseball, basketball, and football. Do we have any like baseball players in the room? Just real quick, you played as a kid? Yeah, yeah. Or you play now? Juan, where's Juan at? Juan over here? Yeah, yeah. Juan plays now. Yeah. So I played, and I'll never forget this. I had a coach that would always tell me this. He would always say like, practice makes perfect, and he would like drill this into us. And so what he would say over and over again, it was like, if you want to be great, then you have to practice constantly. Like it's like this never-ending sort of like constant sort of practice thing, which was great. And then I got a pitching coach when I was a little bit older, and he was like this MLB guy. And then he told me this, I thought it was so good. He goes, yes, you have to practice constantly, but on the other side of that, you don't just practice constantly. He says, you have to practice the right way over and over and over and over again. And that was also true. And he would say like perfect practice, and he actually made t-shirts and started selling them, which I think was hilarious. It's like perfect practice makes perfect baseball. That was his whole thing. And I would practice. Now, here's what happened. I loved baseball, and I really enjoyed it. And so I would play, and I would practice over and over and over again. It just became my whole life. And then there was a part of me that like slowly began to get ingrained in my head as a kid, that it was like I needed to constantly be on and hustling. You know what I mean? I needed to constantly be pursuing. I needed to constantly be reaching a little bit further. I needed to constantly and never-ending sort of getting better and nonstop sort of thing. Like in some ways, there's like this unending pursuit that I could never really stop doing it. And so that's what I did. Now, I loved it. And so what I would do, I don't know if you guys have kids like this, but I'd go outside with a tennis ball, and we had this brick house, and I would take a tennis ball, and this is how anal I am, but I would write down on a sheet of paper how many of them were like, I'd draw out a strike zone, how many of them were strikes, how many were balls. I'd play entire games in my head. I was an only child, but anyway, so I'd do this over and over and over again. It was constant, and it was a really good thing. So I'll tell you, like, it was actually a really good thing, and I got to play baseball, and I did really well, and that was really fun, until there came a point that sort of focused energy and intensity started to spill out into almost every area of my life. And all of a sudden, there was a piece of me that just had this like unending pursuit of something I loved. But what I assumed, and it was very, very like kind of subtle, is I also assumed that my sort of drive should always be driving somewhere, right? That I should always be going. I should always be like nonstop, unending pursuit, just keep going. Now, there's a lot of ways that you can talk about this, and it is one of these things that's so fascinating because it is good, and also unchecked, it's one of the most defeating and deadly things for your soul, right? And we have so many different ways that we talk about it. One of the ways that we talk about it, and especially if you're on Twitter, if you're still on Twitter anymore, you see this, if you know, you know. There's this part about it where it's like hustle culture, and you get this, and there's nothing wrong with hustling. I think every day you should be hustling, sorry. Thank you. 3 kids. That's where that joke came from. Anyway, and you get this. Like there's this hustle thing where it just never ends, and hustle culture pushes you to never, ever, ever stop, right? And some of you just do this, and some of you do it naturally, right? You see a ladder, and the only question you ask is, "Where's the end of it?" Because I want to climb all the way to the top, right? And that's not a bad thing. That's a God-given trait a lot of times. Now, what happens though is when you get into this mode of hustling, and it gets into so many different areas of your life, and it goes unchecked. What ends up happening in our lives is we just continue to drive whatever it is that we're driving all the way into some sort of wall when we don't learn to stop, right? Now, stopping and pausing and renewing ourselves and all of those kinds of things are all things that we like to tell people that we do, but never really do, right? And some of you, you're like me, like you have young kids. And when I think about this kind of thought, I go like, that's great. But even when I try to stop, there's somebody tugging at my leg saying, Daddy, can we play catch, Or Daddy, can we play princesses? Or one of them just throws up on me because he's one, Like there's a little bit of that, And it's like this never ending sort of like pause and stop. Now, you see this in our culture. In fact, and I think this is so fascinating, when you look at the way that you are marketed to, a lot of the things that are marketed to you are marketed in a way where it sort of positions itself to be the thing that helps you relax, right? I love that Netflix said this. They asked Netflix at one point, what's your number one competitor? Who's your number one competitor? And they said sleep, which I thought was so fascinating. Because there's something about you that's just drawn to like, I just want to veg out. I just want to stop. I want to do that sort of thing. I love if you look at like Airbnbs and these kinds of things, we want to tailor make our sort of rest and stop moments, and we long for it. You look at magazines, right? Magazines aren't just people that are on the cover and working constantly. They're people who are relaxing or working working in a comfortable place, right? There's all of these sorts of things because there's something innate in us that knows we probably should pause and stop and also has a really hard time doing it, right? Now, you might be a stay-at-home parent, and you know this. Like, you can always be on for the kids that are home and never, like, learn to pause and stop. Some of you are high-level leaders in this room. You're leading extraordinary ways, and you know this. It never ends. Like, the inbox might get to 0 for 11 seconds before you get another one, right? Your assistant can filter out to an extent, but at some point or another, you're always on. And even when you're not on, you know this, even when you're not on, you're kind of on. Like it's just kind of there and it doesn't really stop, right? Now, I'll tell you for me, and this is just really honest with you, this is one of those things that I always hesitate to talk about because I'm so bad at it, right? I'll just tell you, if you're like, hey, what's the model example of somebody who does this well? I work hard at this and I also struggle with it a lot. And I struggled with it yesterday. And I struggle with it in like the 1% sort of areas where there'll be places in my life where I go, I can make it 1% better, but it'll take me 7 hours to do it. And I'm the person who wants to spend the 7 hours to make it 1% better, right? And that's okay. Those things can serve you well until they don't. Now, we talked about the marketing thing. How many of you in the room have ever worn or have an Apple Watch? Does anybody have Apple Watches in the room, or you've seen these sort of things? Yeah. I think this is always so fun. They have this app on the Apple Watch that's called the breathing app. Has anybody ever done this before? Some of you see this and you feel it. You know what I mean? Because it has this thing that just like, and it's so funny. My Apple Watch will do this to me now. Like I say it does it to me, not that I set the settings or anything. But it'll tell me like, hey, you need to stop and pause and breathe. And what happens with this, I think it's so funny, is it causes you to like pay attention to your breath. Like you're supposed to breathe in and out with this sort of blob of whatever the blue color is. You know what I mean? And you just keep doing this. Now, I love that the first time I did it, it was so funny. It was in a stressful week. I decided to do that. And you're supposed to do it for like, I think it's like a minute maybe. Does anybody know? It's like a minute long. And so I turned it on. I sat there at my desk in a stressful week where I was working on stuff. I turned it on. I last 14 seconds before I started returning emails as my watch is doing this thing to me. You know what I mean? Like my watch is trying to get me to breathe. And I'm just like, no. You know, like there's a part of me that just, I struggled with it that much, right? And you know this. Like it's hard to pause and it's hard to stop moving so fast, and it's hard to do that. And some of you are empty nesters in the room, and you worked for a long time, and maybe you moved into a season of retirement, and you felt it like you hit a wall. Like you ran so fast, and then you just stopped, and it felt like your life, like what now, you know? Because you're only accustomed to moving quickly. And so here's what I want to do, and we're going to do a fun little exercise thanks to Steve Jobs, right? I want you to look at this little blob thing real quick. And I want you just for a second to breathe like this. And so when it kind of opens up, it's when you like take a deep breath, and we're not going to do any weird like meditation thing after this, I promise. I just want you to pay attention to your breath just for a second, right? Kind of breathe in and out with this sort of thing. Now, what's also fun is when I just stop talking for 4 or 5 seconds and you're doing this breathing thing, most of us feel a little bit awkward because we're also never in silence. But think about this, like paying attention to your breath, because your breath sustains every part of your experience in your life. There's this cool video that shows people breathing at different times, right? It shows like a child breathing when he's born. And then it shows like a couple like breathing on a first date. And you see these like moments where somebody's gasping for air because they ran, or someone's out of breath. And when you become aware of your breath, it does something to your mind, because it reminds you how fragile you actually are, right? I put it in my notes to say it this way, that your breath is this reminder of two very distinct things. The first part of it is this. Your breath reminds you of like your power and strength, right? Like when you run and you score a touchdown and you get there and you're breathing hard, there's something about how hard you're breathing that just feels like strength. But then there's also part of it that you can feel fragile and vulnerable too. Right, I talked about my mom earlier. So one of the things that happened is she had this moment where she was like had labored breathing and it was shallow breathing, right? And she has all these things hooked up to her. And I was just paying attention. Like I don't think about breathing enough, but I'm watching her struggle for breath, and all of a sudden there's something about it that reshapes everything. Like you can feel incredibly fragile and vulnerable with your breath too. And the reason that you feel both of those things is because when you pause long enough to recognize your own humanity, your breath is the thing that just reminds you of all of it, right? which is no wonder that when you look at the Old and New Testament, the way that God is talked about oftentimes is within the context of this like wind, air, breath sort of thing. And we get this beautiful picture in Exodus chapter 3, and there's a guy named Moses. Most of us know Moses with the stick and the water and all that stuff. Like you get that story, but then you got these stories where he's becoming this leader, and he's anxious about it, he's nervous about it, he doesn't know if he's the one that should do it, right? And you have this conversation that happens between him and God in Exodus chapter 3. And I'll tell you where it goes, or I'll tell you where it's gonna go. You have the conversation with his insecurity, but where it goes is God talking about who he is. And what God uses to talk about who he is like earth-shattering when you pause and you look and you think about what it says. So in Exodus chapter 3, here's what it says. It says, when the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses, right? Here I am. So this is that moment that a lot of you kind of know about. It's this conversation between God. God showed up in a miraculous way. He's talking to him. And Moses' response to the miraculous moment, and I love this, is here I am, right? It's not a pushback on it. It's not all this. It's like a here I am. He steps over and it says this, and I love it. God responds to him and says, don't come any closer. Take off your sandals, for this place where you are standing, and I don't miss this, is holy or sacred ground or sacred space. Now, this is one of those things, and let me tell you this real quick. This is one of those things in our lives where we just don't have a lot of that kind of thing, right? How many of you take off your shoes when you go in your house? Anybody take off your shoes and you make sure everybody else takes off their shoes before you go in your house? Yeah, it's funny. In the South, we don't do that because it doesn't ever snow. But we got to Michigan and it snowed daily. And there was a part of us that we started doing it. I'll never forget, like, taking off my shoes. And there's something vulnerable about that, too, because it's like, I really think I changed my socks yesterday. You know what I mean? Like, and yesterday, not today. It was, anyway. So there's a piece of that. But there's a part of you that goes, where are the spaces that just feel like more than? Like sacred, like special, like you're reminded of these kinds of things. And what happens with Moses here is he's brought into a moment with God where God is going, what's about to happen and what is happening here is sacred. It's not just the mundane. It's not just the ordinary. This moment is going to be sacred for you. And then in verse 6 it says this. And so then he says, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. I have been the God for all of this time. And at this, Moses, and I love this, he hides his face because he was afraid to look at God. Now, I'm going to tell you this. I went to school on the Bible stuff for a long time. This is what I do for fun. I just go sit at restaurants and I read theology books. It's like, hey, I'm cool. There's all these sorts of things. But I'll tell you this. In the next verse, in this verse, nobody quite gets exactly what the tangible thing is. Like, number one, I don't know what it looks like does God's voice sound like Morgan Freeman? I don't know. But there's this moment where it's this kind of thing happening. I get it. There's miraculous parts of this happening. But this part in particular is so fascinating because he tangibly is in the presence of God to the point where he feels like he should hide his face because of what? The power, the beauty, the beyond natural components of this. What is it that causes him, not even in shame, just in almost fear, hides his face from God as he continues to understand more and more and more about who God is with him. And you have verses where the conversation continues and God speaks into who he is and what he's going to do. And then in verse 10 it says this, I love it. It says, so God responds to him and says, so now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh, this sort of leader of this area, to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt, which is the impossible task, which is the calling sort of thing that happens with him, and it happens in this sacred space. You are to go. I am sending you into the impossible from these moments. And then Moses says to God, which I absolutely love because it's a human moment. He says, but God, like, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh or this king and bring all these Israelites out of Egypt, all of these hundreds of thousands of people out of captivity and slavery? Who am I? Who am I that's going to be sent? And God responds with himself. And he says this. He says, I will be with you. And this will be a sign to you that it is I who have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you will worship God. And don't miss this. You read past this so quickly. And you will worship me on this mountain, in this sacred space, in this place that you've been reminded that you are not alone, and I am with you here. And then Moses responds back to God and he says this. He says, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And I love this question. And they ask me, what is his name? What shall I tell them? And this is when it gets so fascinating and so fun. He's not debating whether God's going to be with him. He's going in a very polytheistic sort of area, in an area of the world where Pharaoh would have likely been viewed in a lot of ways as God. He's like, when they ask me who is it that sent me, when they ask me who is empowering me, when they ask me who comes, what am I supposed to say to them? And the next phrase is so fascinating. Scholars debate this for years and years, so many years. The response that God has is this. He says, here's what you tell him. He says, I am who I am. And this is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. Now, can you imagine saying that to somebody? Well, who sent you here to free out all these people? Well, I am sent me. What does that mean? It's the cyclical sort of eternal thing. Some people talk about it like that. It's like God is saying, I'm eternal. I've always been. I always will be. Yeah, that's great. Some people talk about it like I am all powerful and I will be all powerful and I will be the sustaining force. Yeah, maybe it's that. Maybe it's both. All sorts of answers. God doesn't clarify. He just says, I am who I am, the eternal being and source of your strength and your power and divine will in the world. And then what comes next in our English Bibles is translated differently than the way that it was originally written, because we don't talk about it like this. What God says next is this. He says to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. Now, if you've read any in the Old Testament in your English Bible, here's what's so fun about this. This sort of Hebrew sort of usage of the word gets translated the Lord, and Lord is all caps, right? And the reason it's all caps is because it's actually coming back to a word that wouldn't have even been like spoken amongst Israelites or Jewish people in this time. Like it's not. In fact, what God uses to name himself in this phrase is so beautiful and powerful, and it was so sacred to this group of people that they wouldn't even pronounce it, right? Now, we do, and you've probably heard this before. I'm going to put this on the screen this way. It's Yahweh, right? Like you've heard, this is what it's translated, Yahweh. But that doesn't get said amongst the group of people who hold this so sacred. In fact, the way that it's looked at, even the way that we put it here, the vowels aren't there, right? Because the language just had consonants. But the consonants that are used together, and this is what's so powerful, this is why I think you should read your Bible, because it's so fascinating. The consonants that are used together are the closest ones to vowels because you almost have to breathe them as you say them, right? Scholars look at this all the time, and again, what does it mean? We'll talk about that in a second. But the beautiful part about this, it's called the tetragrammaton, right? What's so fascinating about this is that the consonants that are used back to back to back to form this thing that we talk about as Yahweh, it's like you breathe it out. And so what God is saying about himself, which is so powerful and so beautiful, is it's almost like a forced breath to get it out. And that's part of the reason it's unspeakable. It's breathed out, but it's not really said. I put it in my notes to say this way: the name of God is, in the way that it's described here, isn't just the Lord. It's to be breathed out, to be experienced. The name of God, the way that it's used here, is to be experienced. And I don't want you to miss this. Through the power of your breath, which is so sacred to this group of people. It's not even talked about. Even in the stories, it was right. You almost like not gloss over, but you wouldn't say it because it was so powerful and so sacred to them. Which made me back to Apple, right? Because all things bring you back to Apple, right? Because it brings you back to your breath. And the beautiful part about this, and I love this, these scholars that talk about this are so fascinating, where it's, when you look at Yahweh, when you look at the name of God that is used here, it gets back to the most basic human sustaining part of your life, which is your breath. It gets you back to the most vulnerable part and the most powerful part of your being. And when God says, here's who sent you, it's I am, and then he says this about Yahweh when he names himself. You get this beautiful picture that's throughout the Old Testament and even in the New Testament, these moments where it's talked about. There is a beautiful sacredness to the presence and power of God. I don't miss this. That draws us to be centered in where our life is sustained. Because the real honest truth is, come on, you know this, I know this. Left to my own thoughts, left to my own being, I drift into assuming that it's all up to me. Like you work, and come on, your boss isn't going, is it all up to God? He's going, did you do your freaking job? You know, there's a little bit of that. Your kids, there's a piece of that, like they're drawing, it's up to you, you know, your spouse is up to you. But there's a piece of us, I don't miss this, that the strength that you need for the things that God has called you for rests not only in your own ability, but it rests in the power and the sustaining source of life that is not you. And you don't get that until you have to get that. And you're reminded of how fragile you are. You don't get that on a Tuesday at 2:00 in a meeting. But you get that when something happens in your life that reminds you that it's outside of your control. You don't get that when you're playing wiffle ball in the front yard with your kid and he's beating you, but you know, I let him get 2 outs, I get 1, but it's fine. You don't get it in that moment. But you get it in the moments when they're asleep and you look and it feels just fragile and precious enough. And this is why, we're going to get really practical in a second, but this is why the Christian faith has a discipline that's baked into it to remind you that it's not all up to you. When you look at the creation narrative in Genesis, I love this, it's so easily glossed over. God makes everything, and then what does God do? He stops, and he rests, and this is so fascinating, he stops and he rests, because he does, because that's the rhythm, because this is how we're to be in the world. He pauses and he stops and he rests. If you look in the Old Testament and even in the New Testament as things are talked about, you find a discipline and a practice that isn't random. It doesn't happen just when we feel like it. It doesn't happen when we crash. It is a part of the renewal of who we are, to pause, to stop, and to rest, and not just sleep, but to be reminded of the breath that is in us, that doesn't come from us, that is from the sustaining life that comes from him, which then propels us forward in the moments when we're overwhelmed to go, it's not all up to me, that there is more happening here. And in the same way that you become aware of your breath, it's almost this beautiful cyclical rhythm of our life that causes us to pause and become aware of our breath again. To become aware of where our sustaining life source comes from, and where our redemptive nature happens, and where your strength as a leader comes from, and where your strength as a parent comes from. It causes us to be renewed. And when you don't do it, now come on, you know this, you say things like, I've been running on fumes. You say things like, I'm tired, but you're not, you're just sad. You say things like, I just need a break, but you don't. Come on, I think Carrie Newhoff, I don't know where he got it. There's something that says like, what got you into feeling broken, coming back and pausing for a week and then coming back and doing the same things will just break you all over again. It is a cyclical pattern and a rhythm of renewal that does something not just to your mind or your body, but to your soul. You've heard it before. A lot of you have heard it before. It's this word Sabbath. And I'll be really honest with you. I love and hate this word. You know why? I love it when I do it and I do it well, because it does all of those things, and I hate it because I don't like to do it. I don't like to stop, right? Now, the ancient word that's actually used for this, it literally means this. It's not like ambiguous. It literally means to stop. It's not like, I wonder what it means. No. It just means to stop. And here's what Sabbath does, right? And it's baked into the rhythm in the Old Testament. Jesus models this for us over and over and over again in the New Testament. It's baked in, and what it does is it creates space for us to breathe in and out. And not in just some metaphorical sense, for your body and your mind to pause and stop and be renewed. And in the same way that we talked about this from Exodus, it's this breathing in and out and being reminded and aware of where it comes from. And then it's space to experience God, to experience the power of who he is and what he's doing inside of us. All right, Sabbath is this, you ready? And again, this is the most uncool, unsexy discipline that you could do with your life. There's no easy way to just go, there's a biblical rhythm to just saying, I'm gonna stop. And that's what it is on a weekly basis, for you to be rested and also to remind yourself of who God is and what he is doing in you and through you. Come on, just for a second. For those of you in the room who are tired, you know this, and you're just tired, you feel beat down, you're just tired. It might be that you just haven't stopped and you can't work your way out of that. You can't just push through that. There's something in you that just needs to pause and be renewed. I put in my notes a series of questions, and these aren't just questions for you. These are questions that I ask myself a lot. So if they seem really personal to me, it's because they are. There's probably 10 others that would be great for you, but here's a few that I'm asking myself constantly around this. What burdens are you carrying that you haven't invited God's presence and wisdom into? What burdens are you carrying that you can't carry well? And you're good, you're disciplined, you do all the right things, but you can't figure out how to carry them well. And what you do, now come on, you might pray about it randomly for 3 seconds, but you haven't said, God, here, I actually need you. I actually can't solve this. I actually can't do it. Where are the places that you've come to the end of your rope, but you pretend that you haven't and you just keep moving forward? What are those spaces? The second question is this: what underlying need motivates your unending habits of work, spending, and pleasure seeking? Come on, let's just be really honest. You're good at what you do, and you can apply this to any of the areas of your life, and you continue to be good at what you do, and you should be. Come on. I think followers of Jesus should be the best people, be the best employees and best employers, certainly the best leaders on the planet, right? But what are the places where the motivation for all of that and the driving force is something that's internal in you that you just haven't solved yet, or you just won't look at because it's too painful? What are the things in you that motivates your pleasure seeking, that you go, I don't want to stop. I just want something to numb my pain while I keep going. What is that for you? What's the thing for you that you go, I can deal with the pressure and the pain. I just need something to help me have a little bit less of it. What is the pleasure-seeking thing that you pursue that just numbs the pain just enough so that you don't have to stop and sit in silence and be aware that you are not all that you have to be, right? Come on, one of the greatest lies, I think, of our culture is that you have everything in you to do everything that you need to do. Come on. It's crap. And here's how you know it's crap. Because you've ran into that wall before. Right? You can look on Twitter all day for somebody who did whatever it is that they did and go, it's all in you. You've got all you need. And come on, but there's a piece of you that goes, if God has put you on the planet for a reason and he's called you to do something extraordinary, he's called you to do things beyond you. He's called you to go further than those things. He's called you to not just get to your limit, but to get to his, and his limit doesn't end. And so what is it in you that goes, I won't face this, but I'll numb the pain by pleasure seeking? And then the last one is the hardest one for me to always answer, because I know the answer, I just don't want to say it out loud. The last one is this: do you secretly believe that everything is up to you and your ability? Come on. And not like, in my head, I know the right thing. I know the Sunday school answer. But if we were to talk to you and look at your life and evaluate your life, right, together, right, which sounds like a really fun coffee, you know. But if we were to do that, would it be evident that you think it's all up to you all the time in your strength? Some of you, come on, you had no idea that you were coming for this thing today, and that's okay. Some of you just need somebody to look at you and say, you know what, you don't have to be tired all the time, right? You don't have to be depleted all the time. That you don't have to carry the weight of the world all the time in that way. That the pressure that you voluntarily carry without ever going, God, here you go, without ever admitting that there's a limit to your ability or your capacity. Come on. You don't have to do that. And it's not, and I'll tell you, this is because it feels very pastory, and I get it, to just be like, well, just pray it away. It's not what I'm saying at all. A lot of it is the discipline of going, here is the place where here's the end of my capacity. Now, God, as I meet the end of my capacity, now what? And what would you have me do? And if you have me to go beyond it, empower me and show me how to do that. I'll tell you this about Sabbath, and this is honest and vulnerable for me, is that when I prioritize this biblical principle of taking a seventh of my week and not trying to produce something, I end up doing more the other 6 days. I end up being a better parent the other 6 days. I'm a better leader the other 6 days. This principle plays itself in so many other places. Everybody talks about, I love this. You apply this to your finances, same sort of thing. People always talk to me about tithing, and it's so funny because everybody's like, there's a little bit of a gotcha when it comes to tithing, 10%, whatever. I always think it's so fascinating. Old Testament talks about 10%. New Testament says, be as generous as you possibly can be. There's not a limit to the percentage. It's just like, give as much as you can give away and watch how God, and this doesn't magically fall out of the sky, but watch how God takes care of you. It becomes do you believe that God takes care of you thing? Which is the exact same thing when it comes to your time and your resources, when it comes to being a human being in the world and producing. Everything that you're going to read on Twitter today is going to tell you to do more, hustle harder. And I'll tell you, if you're lazy, read that and don't listen to me. Right, that's fine. I'm just kidding. You should still Sabbath. Most all of you aren't. And you're grinding to the place where you need just the margin and the space to be renewed. So I told you I'd be practical. I'm going to tell you how I work at this constantly, right? And if you've never done this discipline before, if you've never said, I'm going to take a day, and I'm not just going to take a day off. I'm going to take a day to be intentional about resting and renewing myself and reminding myself who God is and what he wants to do through me. It can feel very jarring. It can feel like it doesn't work in the beginning, all these kind of things. So this is, I think, how to start if you're not doing this. The first thing is this. I think you have to subtract. I don't think you're adding something to your plate, right? Now, some of you, when you hear me talk about this, you're like, you are adding a day off to my life, right? It's just fun. It's not like it's getting easier. I'm getting less. I'm adding a day to rest and renew to my life. That just feels like more. I don't think you think of it that way. Well, you're not adding. Well, the thing that you can do is, what are you going to subtract from that day, right? Are you going to subtract social media from that day so that you can focus, like whatever time you spend on your phone, which last week for me was 4 hours and 12 minutes, but we'll talk about that another time. What if you took just time and space to stop that for a day, right? Put it on airplane mode. Now, and let's just do this together. If you're, let's just say 40 and under in the room, right? Where am I 40 and under? 40 and under. Let me tell you about this. I don't know, about 25 years ago, there were people who didn't carry a phone with them. And here's what's crazy. I know this is nuts. And it's like, and they didn't have Find My iPhone. They had one of these. Now, don't tell myself. They had one of these. Like, you remember that? You know what I'm talking about? With a terrible sound. He was like, my great aunt Bubba had one of these. And she's like, a dial is not. And if you mess up, that was the only time I ever heard her cuss. It's fun. You hang it up, you go back through. This is even wilder to me. People used to memorize other people's numbers. Like, I know mine and my wife's most of the time. You know what I mean? Like, just kidding. 937. I won't anyway. Yeah, you get it. Like, there's a piece of now. This is nuts. If you were to say, Patrick, put your phone down for a day, I would twitch for a minute. You know what I mean? Like, it's hard. Some of you go to the bathroom with your phone. And so some of you, okay, we all do that. Like, you don't stop from it ever. Now, come on. You're not just adding something to your plate. What if you just subtracted for an hour of that day that you were unreachable except for the people that love you? But what if it all burns down? We've figured it out for millennia, Fine. What's that, right? Some of you, when it comes to this, like you need to subtract. Like, this is hard. And I think I say this to you. If you have young kids, I'm not to call you out. We stole this from Evan and his wife Bethany. I think it's just so good. They talk about rhythms of getting away, right? And now we're in it, so I'm calling you out. Sorry. But I love this. They're like, and they love their kids. They're some of the best parents on the planet, I think. But they're also like, and we also need space from our kids at times. So one of them will go off. And so we're like, so we talk about this in our house. So how often could we do that? I don't know. Like, some of you ready? You need to take an hour or two a day where you just like pause and go like, not a day, don't do it a day, but like a week during your Sabbath, and go like, okay, honey, there you go. And some of you might be single parents in the room. I grew up in a single parent home. Here's what my mom would do. When I got to the age where I could be alone enough for an hour, she would disappear somewhere else in the house and let me play a video game or something. You know what I mean? This is like before you're putting iPads. It was like Sega. You know what I'm talking about? Some of you, Sonic the Hedgehog. And you just take a minute and if some of you, you're not going to run into a full Sabbath day, you're going to run into Sabbath moments, and that's a great start, and you need to start that. Where you're not going to just add, you're going to subtract something, at least from that space that is holy and sacred for you to renew. The second thing is this, and when you get this, I think it shapes everything else about your life, is that you're going to work from rest, not for rest, right? Let me tell you this. Sunday is not the last day of your week. For us, we do like Friday night into Saturday. That's what we try to do, right? You work from rest, not for it. You're not living for the weekend. Your day one is being renewed, and then you go from there. And I'll tell you, I know this is it's like, oh, that's semantics. It's really not. When you say, I'm going to start God and give you the first fruits, which is a real churchy way to say first parts of my week in my life, there's something that you are moving through your week with strength, not like reaching for it as you slide into it, right? You work from rest. You're not working just to get rest. And I think a great Sabbath looks like this, right? And there's so many different ways to talk about it, but you work to stop, right? Which is what Sabbath means. I'm going to stop. I'm just going to pause. I'm going to subtract. I'm going to stop things. I'm going to rest. Let me say this, because this is what I always used to think. People take naps. Is that how you rest? That's not me. That's not restful. 2 o'clock in the afternoon just sleeping. That's not. Some people were like, I'm just going to watch TV. I was like, that's not it. That doesn't do anything for me. And so I'll tell you what I do. Now, you're different than me, and I get that, but here's what I do. Rest for me looks like doing something with my hands. And I'm not like a handyman, so I'm not coming to build your house, right? I'll tell you, I had to find like hobbies. One of the hobbies that I'm working on is like building these tiny little like mechanical watches. Do I care at all about having a mechanical? I mean, yeah, I actually like mechanical watches. But that's not it. It's restful for my mind to turn off, right? I love this. There's some guys, and I'd be like this. I don't play video games a ton. That's not really my thing, but if I'm going to stop, I can play. I created my little MLB 2000 whatever player. I can turn my brain off to stop the cycle of it. I don't know what this is for you, but it will be unique for you, and it may or may not be sleeping, right? You should sleep. That's great, but that's not rest. What is the thing that gives you energy? The other one is this, enjoy. I love this. Oh, sorry, let's go back one more. Yeah, enjoy. Enjoy is fun, and I'll tell you this. On your Sabbath, on your day to renew, you need to do something that you actually enjoy. And if you're here and you have kids or your parents in the room, you know this, that can feel difficult because you're just giving to what they enjoy, and I get that. Well, it's something that you deeply enjoy for you. There's a writer named John Mark Comer. I love the way that he talks about this. The phrase is weird, but it's a great thought. The phrase is called pleasure stacking is what he calls it. And he gives a list of like 25 things that are just suggestions that you could do. And I love the first one is like make pancakes and eat them. And I was like, well, that's my love language. You know what I mean? Like, that's great. And then it's like, pick 5. What are the 4 or 5 things that I just enjoy that feel life-giving to me? What are those things for you? And then the last one is remember. And here's what you remember. Ready? And this is where the Sabbath thing feels so sacred for people. And when you do it well, when you do it right, you feel this, and that's this. That you remember and you remind yourself that every part of your being is coming at you saying what you produce is what makes you matter. And what you put out in the world is what makes you matter as a person. And that your abilities are all enough and all these sorts of things. And what you remember is this, and don't miss this. It's not some out there random thing. It's that you remember that all of the things that also make you feel fragile can make you feel empowered, and that comes from him. You remember that it's through the redemptive work of Christ that you are even who you are anymore. And that you remember that in the highs and the lows, in your successes and your failures, when you've reached your limit and when you just feel like you can't find, whatever that is, you remind yourself that the God who is with you is limitless and has called you beyond your abilities and has called you beyond those things. And it's through his empowerment that you find your strength. And so I'll tell you the thing that I wanted you to remember so desperately about this, and I wish I could inspire everybody to do this, but here's what it is. Following the way of Jesus leads us to a place where we work from, not for, the rest and renewal. And so the way we're going to wrap up our time together, it's going to be a little bit different than what we usually do, and I hope that's okay. If not, I have a microphone and you don't, so I don't know how to solve this for you right now, but we're going to do this for a minute. You know, I get it. Here's what we're going to do. Are you ready? Here's what we're going to do. If you're here and this has been something that you go, I intuitively know that's what I need, but there's not an ounce in me that's about to do that. You know what I mean? Like, let's just be really honest. That sounds really great for everybody else, but it's going to be hard for you. What we're going to do is we're going to respond to that here in just a second. But what I want to do is I want you just to take a minute and reflect sort of inwardly. And so the best way that we know how to do that is to have Josh Ellis play some keys behind us, which is great, and to have you close your eyes for a second and bow your heads. And for many of you, you haven't closed your eyes and just stopped all week, right? And that's okay. But I'd love for you to do that just for a second. I'd love for you to close your eyes for a second. I'd love you to bow your heads for a second. And here's what I'm going to ask you to do. And this is going to be the uncomfortable part, right? And I'm going to ask you if you would, just for everybody else, if you actually would, like, close your eyes for a second, bow your heads, because I'm going to have you respond. But if you're a person here and you say that you're tired, but you're actually sad, right? Here's what I want you to do just for a second. This isn't even for me. This is because I can't even see most of you. I'd love for you, if that's you, just to raise your hand for a second. Like, if that's you, like, I tell people that I'm tired, but what I actually feel is like I'm sad more than that. That's you. Okay, that's great. Okay. Some of you, if you're like this, you constantly feel overwhelmed. Like, if you're just going to be really honest, like, you just feel a little bit overwhelmed at times. I'd love for you, if that's you, I'd love for you to raise your hand just for a second. Just acknowledge, like, I just feel overwhelmed a lot. Yeah. Okay. Here's another one. If you're here and if you're really honest, you're like, what I feel more times than not is that I just sometimes let people down. That I feel pressure to perform for other people and I'm letting them down. I'd love for you just right now, I'd love for you to raise your hand just for a second. Just put that out, I let them down, yeah. Yeah. If you're really honest, and this is kind of the last one, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna pray together for a second, but if you're a person, you're really honest, and you're going, I live my life the way that I live it, but having a rhythm of Sabbath in my life is not something that exists right now, right? If that's you, like, be honest. Like, let's talk about the last 3 months. Let's keep it there. Last 3 months, that hasn't existed for you in the last 3 months. I'd love for you to raise your hand right now, if that's you. This just hasn't existed in a long time. Yeah. Okay. All right, and so here's what I'm going to ask you to do with your heads bowed, eyes closed. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. I'm going to pray over you in a second about the first sort of set of things that we've done. But if you're a person who hasn't kept the Sabbath as a discipline, as a part of your rhythm, it's going to be really blunt, and it's going to feel like I'm coming down, but it's not. It's not that at all. But that is a system that God set up in the world for you, and it's a sin to not do that, right? And so here's what I'm going to tell you, and this isn't a shaming thing. This is actually a freeing thing, I think, for all of us. And this is me, just to be really honest. I have not done this well the last 3 months. I would raise my hand with that. I would tell you this. But the first step in that is to actually, what the scriptures talk about in terms of repentance. And to say this, like, God, I'm not just sorry, but I am sorry that I haven't done your will in that way. And I'm also going to commit to doing it differently. And so just for a second, right, we're not taking long with this. If that's you and you raise your hand, I want you just in your head just to pray that prayer. God, forgive me for not living my life the way that you've called me to live it. And God, I'm going to commit to doing it differently to the best of my ability. I'm going to repent. I'm going to move the other direction. I'm going to give you just a second to do that now. Okay. The last thing that we're going to do is I'm going to pray over you, and almost like a benediction-esque kind of thing, but what I want to do is just collectively over us, just so you know, if you raised your hand, about 90% of the people in this room raise their hand at one of those, or you're not alone. But what I want to do is I want to just pray that God begins to heal those areas of our life as we trust him with this discipline, right? So let me pray for you. Father, for the person in the room who feels overwhelmed and it just all feels so heavy, Father, I pray that you would remind them that they don't have to carry it all by themselves. And God, circumstances they may or may not be able to control, God, I pray that when they find themselves at that limit, that they would come to you open-handed with it. Pray for the person in the room who feels sad, like emotionally, it just feels sad, and they say they're tired, or they come up with other phrases, and it's hard to admit that they actually just feel pain. But God, we just pray that they would find themselves in a regular rhythm of renewal, and through that renewal, that you would just begin the beyond natural power working of healing their heart, or whatever those things that are sad are, which is going to be oftentimes very painful to get through it, but I pray that they would take the step to do that. God, I pray for the person in the room that's just tired because they just haven't stopped in a long time. God, I pray that you would help them to develop this discipline and to be accountable to it. And God, last thing I want to pray for is every parent in the room with kids. I know because I feel this too. It can feel impossible to do this well. God, whatever rhythm that you have for them to accomplish this, God, we just ask that you would give them wisdom. Ask them to help them to ask those questions, but you would give them the rhythm to figure out how to renew and rest in these ways. That you would empower them to be even better parents moving forward. God, we thank you so much for that. We thank you for inspiring them and helping them to know how to take those steps.